In this part of the project, let's talk about different ways we can make the headlines for each of the different food groups really stand out and be treated like something that can grab your eye and attention. Let's zoom into group number 1. If you need to, you can use your zoom tool, command and the plus and minus signs, or if you're on a laptop, sometimes you can even pinch zoom to be able to zoom into here. If you select group 1, notice that it's also selected in the layers panel. The first thing we need to do is to change the name of this group. Let's grab our type tool and then highlight the words group 1, and this is the main event. Now, since this is going to be a main attention-getting headline that's supposed to be distinct from the rest of the body copy, we need to make sure there's plenty of contrast in its design. Right now, they're both using the same font of Myriad Pro, and about the only major contrast is the color of it as well as the size of it. One thing that we could do is to choose a font that's nice and bold and matches the styling of the logo. Now, I don't know exactly what font is chosen here, but I could go into my entire font library and see if I can find something that does match the boldness and the readability that also matches the style of my overall design. Now, your computer may have some slightly different fonts than I have installed on mine, or you can also go online and find different fonts that you could install either from the Adobe website or from other third-party websites. In my case, I found a great one called Anodyne Combined. With this one, it has a nice little gritty feel, just like our logo. It's even got a nice little drop shadow to it. So with that selected, I'm going to make it slightly bigger to match the size of my area. And if necessary, I can use my Move tool and have the transform controls turned on, and I can also resize it this way as well too. The main thing that you want to know about these headlines is that when you do it for one, we need to keep things consistent for all of them. Specifically, keeping them consistent in the font, the color, the styling, and typically the size. Now, you can adjust the size a little bit, but we don't want it to be dramatic. With this one done, so I've got Anodyne Combined Italic, and I can see it's roughly 29 points tall. Let's go over to the other group. The next group here for group 2, we can highlight it. This is going to be sandwiches. We can highlight that. And since I've used that font already, I can find it easily at the very top of my fonts list. So with it selected, there it is there. And once again, let's change the styling of it to be 29. A final thing to note about changing up the stylings of this is that you can find them in your little taskbar down here, or if you go over to the Properties panel, you can scroll down and get all the properties down here. Things like being able to make them all caps or small caps, or just changing up their spacing, that kind of stuff. As long as you strive to be consistent, that's what I'm looking for. Group 3 is salads. And again, for mine, Anodyne Combined. And let's make that 29. That looks good. Group 4 are cuts. And group 5 is drinks. Notice how this particular font is all caps. There are no lower cases for this style. Let's back out and see how this shows up and if it shows up really good for everything. Yeah, so far so good. By the way, the Our Story portion, we're going to deal with that in our next video. So for now, we're just going to deal with the main headlines. Now, to make these headlines stand out even more, let's put a little border behind each one of them. In order to do this, we're going to use our paintbrush to paint on a layer that's below each of the different ones. So one more time, let's zoom in to the main event and select it so that our layer is selected. I'm going to drag off my layers panel so you can see this part a little bit easier. We need to be able to put this border behind or below the layer for the main event layer. So to do this, I'm going to go down to the very bottom of my layers panel. Again, let me set this up so you can see a little bit better. With it selected, you can create a new layer. It's going to be called layer 1, and then we can drag that new layer below the main event. And if we double click it, I'm going to call this one border 1. With this layer selected, it's transparent, and we're going to paint inside of this one. Now the tool we're going to use to do this is going to be your regular paintbrush tool. If you don't see it, it's called the brush tool, not the paintbrush tool. You can hit the letter B on your keyboard and it'll automatically select it. One thing to note, there are some similar looking paintbrushes and brush tools that do different jobs. We specifically want to use the brush tool. One thing about the brush tool is to pay attention to all the options that you have up at the very top. There's lots of different brushes that you can choose from. If you click on the down arrow up here, this will open up all of your brush options and you can see all of them listed out inside of these different folders. Now if you can't see the entire folders, you may want to click on the edge of this. Let's do the bottom corner of it, and you can drag it out to see all the names on this side. When you open up the general brushes, all the general brushes are typically round, and you can choose soft and hard, or even some of them have pressure sensitivity. Since we want to have a texture that matches the style of our menu that we're working on, let's try to choose a media brush that mimics that texture. If you open up dry media, you can see there's a variety of different little brushes inside of here. Again, open them all the way up to see exactly what we're looking for. These Kyle brushes have a little icon associated with them. And if you see the brush icon, that means it's a paintbrush tool. Some of these brushes look like brushes, but if you look at the icon, in this case, it's actually an eraser tool. So if I was to select this one, you notice that it automatically picks my eraser and I can't paint with it. It's just going to erase using that one. However, I could choose one of these other ones, like the Ultimate Pastel Palooza. With this selected, we also need to change up our color that we're painting with. To pick the appropriate color, we want to be able to pick it from our foreground color scheme on the bottom of our tool panel. One click on this first little swatch will open up your color picker. Now within our color picker, we can also go back to our color themes and choose a color that's appropriate for these. Again, you can always deviate just a little bit, but I want to try to keep it within this area. I want something that's not so dark to clash with the background, but not too light to make the foreground unreadable. I'm going to choose this mid-tone of orange. That looks really good. So CC8D1A, CC8D1A. Jumping back into Photoshop, I can type it in the hex here, CC8D1A. And now I've got that particular one, and we'll say OK. And I can start to paint with it. Now remember, we're painting on the border layer that's new, that was below the main event. So when I click and drag, you can see how it creates this kind of textured edge as if it was that particular media. Now again, you can play around with the settings on this to get different kinds of effects. I recommend painting in normal mode so we get just the color that we want from this. If you drop the opacity of it, it will paint that color, but just at a lower opacity. This may be something that you want to do because you can see after several passes, it'll start to build up the look and feel of how that looks. If you keep your opacity at 100%, but adjust the flow of it, we'll bring the flow way down. This paints it at 100%, but it tends to make it a little bit more textured. And this really works well if you've got a textured brush. Think of the flow of it as the flow from a spray paint can. If you press down the nozzle of a spray paint, it goes out really slow and sputtery, and that's what's happening for the flow of this one. Otherwise, you can keep everything by default and just paint like this to give you that kind of effect. The smoothing and the other options are other things to play around with, but for the most part, I'm going to keep those at 0% to keep things simple. Now, as you paint on here, you may like it or you may not. If you don't like what you've painted, you can always go up to Select All. This will select everything that's on the layer that we have selected, and then you can hit the Delete key and delete it away. You can then go to Select and Deselect. If you want to play around with other brushes, let's see what else that we have up here. Under Wet Media, again, you can open it up and see all the different kinds of media brushes. However, take note, some of these are not paint brushes. They're either smudge or they're other kinds of brushes. But let's do the Kyle's Inkbox Classic Cartoonist. Again, As I paint, you can see it's got a little bit of a textured edge. Maybe for this one, we'll make it much larger. Let's make it really big so I can, in one pass, be able to highlight this. That looks really good right there. I kind of like the look of that feel. Yours may be different, but the main thing is we want to be able to give it some good contrast. Of course, you can play around with the colors. Of course, you can play around with the style of brushes. One last thing I'll say about brushes is that if you want to see even more brushes, you can open up your special effects brushes and use the spatter brushes, or you can go up to the little options at the top of the drop-down menu for your brush options and add the legacy brushes. Now when you select it, it's going to ask you to restore the brushes, and we'll say OK. Legacy brushes are a set of older brushes, here's the folder now added to it, that were part of an older version of Photoshop. And a lot of these are still very, very good. Now specifically, some of the faux finish or some of the natural or special effects brushes can give you some different kinds of effects. When you select these, like say I'm going to do scattered wildflowers just to see what it looks like. With it selected, we'll scoot over to the side and start painting. You can see the kind of effect. It looks like it's painting some flowers behind it. That may or may not be something that you want, but it's a great way of adding this kind of effect to the overall design. Again, if you want to delete it away, you can either select it and delete it, or at any time we can go up to Edit and we can hit Undo Brush, and we can keep doing that until it completely toggles and goes away. Once I got the main event created, I think everything looks good. Let's go over to Sandwiches. I'm going to go back up and choose that brush that I was using before, which is saved nicely up here. Again, with the Sandwiches layer selected, I'm going to make a new layer, and that layer needs to be below my Sandwiches layer. So I'm going to, there we go, create a new one, drag it below, and we'll call this Border 2. And then let's paint behind the sandwiches. I'm trying to make it look splotchy around that one. That looks good. Let's go down to the salads, choose the salads layer. Here's a great keyboard shortcut to know. If you hold down the Option or the Alt key whenever you create a new, here's a great keyboard shortcut to know. If you hold down the Command key on a Mac or the Control key on a Windows computer and you click on the new layer, it'll automatically create a new layer that's below the salads layer. So right now I've got layer 1, and we'll call this border number 3. Since it's below it, I can now paint behind it and get it to show up behind there. We'll zoom out. Let's go up to Cuts. Select Cuts. Let's do our keyboard shortcut trick. Command or Control and the plus sign. There's our new layer. This is border 4. Now you may be asking, why make a new layer for each individual one? Why not just paint it all on the same layer? The advantage of everything having its own individual layer is that if I ever wanted to quickly erase it away, I can select it and do it. Or if I wanted to adjust it, because it's on its own layer, only that's going to get adjusted and moved around. And that's what I really want to do. I want to be able to have full control over the way things look. Finally, let's do it for drinks. Again, select the drinks layer, make a new one below. This is border 4. Grab my brush tool. Excuse me, this is border number 5. There we go. Grab my brush tool and let's add to there. Again, you can choose different colors, you can choose different brushes, and you can choose different sizes that you want all of these to be. The final thing I need to do now is to arrange these so that there's some good spacing between everything. As I zoom in, perhaps I'll select some of the columns of information and I'll drag them down so that they all move together. Rather than moving one thing at a time, like I can select the title, if I go over to my layers, I can hold down the Shift key and get both the name and its border. So I clicked on both of those to get both of them. Now, whoops, I can use my arrow keys on my keyboard and I can nudge everything down until both of those are in place. Doing the same for sandwiches looks good, but let's move salads back into place. First, I'll choose the salads layer, hold down Shift and get the borders layer too, so both of those are selected. And then I can either click and drag and put it into place, or I can use my arrow keys to lightly nudge it right where it needs to be. Cuts looks good, but let's move drinks over just a bit more. Select them and move it down. Everything has a consistent style and feel and look, and now adding those little borders behind it really does make it pop out and helps establish where everything else is. If you haven't done so already, let's go up to File and save what we're working on. And in the next video, let's work on the Our Story section.